The signal came from nowhere. That's what the log said. No trajectory, no origin point, no electromagnetic signature building over parsecs. One moment the deep space array was silent. The next, a transmission burned through every channel at once, overriding lunar relays, orbital defense grids, even the closed networks buried beneath NORAD's granite. The message was simple, desperate, and impossible. This is Exodus. We're coming home. Exodus. The name triggered archival searches across 100 institutions simultaneously. A generation ship. Launched in 2187 during the collapse, when Earth's governments threw everything they had at the stars in a last desperate bid for species survival. 12 ships. 11 confirmed destroyed or lost. Exodus was the 12th. The one that stopped transmitting 48 hours after launch. The one we'd mourned for 2 centuries before forgetting entirely. Except the math didn't work. Exodus had been gone for 203 years. Not 40,000. The timestamp embedded in their transmission said otherwise. Their clocks, their logs, their genetic records, all insisted they'd been traveling for 40 millennia. That Earth had abandoned them. That we'd sent them away and never called them back. I was part of the contact team because I specialized in temporal anomalies, the kind that occurred near certain drive systems or relativistic thresholds. My job was to explain the discrepancy. To find the error in their data or ours. But when Exodus entered the solar system 3 weeks later, every telescope, every sensor, every camera trained on it showed the same thing. The ship was old. Not 200 years old. 40,000 years old. Its hull was pitted and scarred by micrometeorite impacts that should have taken epochs to accumulate. Its reactor signature was degraded in ways that matched theoretical models of deep time decay. And the people inside. The thermal scans showed them moving, thousands of them, but the shapes were wrong. The proportions didn't match human physiognomy. Too tall. Limbs too long. Heads too narrow. We sent drones first. They docked at Exodus's primary airlock and transmitted footage back to Earth. The corridors inside were vast, stretched, as if the ship's interior geometry had been redesigned for inhabitants who'd outgrown the human template. The walls were covered in markings, not writing exactly, but patterns that seemed to shift when you looked at them directly. Symbols that suggested language but refused to resolve into meaning. The drones found no bodies. No skeletal remains. No evidence of the original crew. Only these others. These descendants. When they finally appeared on camera, I felt something in my chest collapse. They were humanoid, but only in the way a reflection is humanoid when the mirror is warped. Their skin was translucent in places, revealing structures beneath that weren't quite bone, weren't quite circulatory systems. Their eyes were too large, too dark, and they moved with a grace that seemed to defy the artificial gravity we knew Exodus had been equipped with. They stared into the cameras and tilted their heads in unison, as if listening to something we couldn't hear. The delegation arrived at our orbital platform a week later. 6 of them, moving through the docking tube with that same eerie synchronization. They wore no suits, no environmental protection, even though our instruments said the pressure and atmosphere in that tube would have killed baseline humans in seconds. They didn't speak at first. Just stood in the observation deck, staring down at Earth with expressions I couldn't read. Then the one at the center, the tallest, turned to face us. Its voice, when it came, was layered, harmonic, like multiple people speaking the same words at slightly different frequencies. "We are Exodus," it said. "You sent us away. You told us there was no hope here. You said Earth was dying and we were the future. Why did you lie?" I tried to explain. I showed them the historical records, the launch logs, the treaties and documents from 2187. I walked them through the timeline as we understood it. Exodus had been gone for 2 centuries, not 40,000 years. Something had happened to their perception, their chronology, some relativistic effect or navigational error that had distorted their experience of time. But they didn't argue. They didn't dispute the evidence. They just looked at me with those vast dark eyes and said, "Your timeline is the error. Ours is real." They had proof. Genetic records showing a clear 40,000-year lineage. Evolutionary drift documented generation by generation. Cultural artifacts, art, music, literature, all showing a continuous unbroken chain of development spanning 400 centuries. They had recordings of Earth's transmissions, they said, broadcasts we'd sent out over millennia, messages begging them to return, to save us, followed by decades of silence, followed by faint signals suggesting humanity had gone extinct or transcended or simply forgotten them. They played some of these recordings for us. The voices were human, unmistakably, but the languages were unknown. The references were to events that had never happened. Wars we'd never fought. Colonies we'd never built. Technologies we'd never invented. I started checking our own records more carefully, looking for inconsistencies. And I found them. Small things at first. Launch dates that didn't quite match between archives. Personnel lists with names that appeared in some databases but not others. Photographs of the Exodus crew that showed different faces depending on which institution you asked. Then larger things. Treaties referencing the Exodus mission that included clauses about recall protocols, about bringing them home after a certain threshold, clauses that didn't exist in the versions I'd studied. I brought this to my superiors. They told me I was experiencing stress. That contact with the Exodus descendants was affecting my cognition. They recommended psychological evaluation. But I saw the fear in their eyes. The recognition. The Exodus delegation didn't wait for us to accept their version of history. They started releasing their records publicly, broadcasting them on every available channel. Footage of Earth as they'd seen it through long-range telescopes over the millennia. A planet that had changed, evolved, died and been reborn, gone through cycles we had no memory of. They showed us cities we'd never built, rising and falling. Oceans that had covered land masses in configurations that didn't match our geological models. Skies that had turned colors we'd never observed. And always, in their transmissions, the same refrain. You sent us away in Timeline Alpha. We are returning to Timeline Beta. You do not remember us because you did not experience our absence. But we experienced it. We evolved through it. And now we are home. I accessed the quantum archives, the ones kept in sealed vaults beneath Geneva, the records that were supposed to be immutable, protected against any form of tampering or decay. I found the Exodus files. And they were different. Not corrupted. Changed. As if they'd been overwritten by a history that was asserting itself retroactively. The launch date was now listed as 42,187 years ago, not 203. The mission parameters included a 40,000-year journey with no expectation of return. The crew manifest showed not the faces I remembered, but others, strangers, people who looked almost but not quite like the baseline humans I knew. I ran chronological diagnostics. The timestamps were consistent. The quantum checksums validated. According to every objective measure, these had always been the records. I was the one who was wrong. The Exodus descendants began coming down to the surface. Not invading. Just arriving. They walked among us, these tall translucent beings, and people reacted with confusion, not fear. Some recognized them. Claimed they'd always known about Exodus, about the 40,000-year mission, about the promise to welcome them home. I interviewed dozens of people. Their memories were rewriting in real time. I watched it happen. A woman who'd been a historian of the collapse era, who'd written papers about the 12-generation ships, who'd mourned Exodus as a tragedy, she sat across from me and calmly explained that Exodus had always been a 40,000-year mission, that this was the plan, that we were welcoming our distant cousins home after an evolutionary journey. When I showed her her own papers, the ones from 5 years ago, she looked at them like they were forgeries. I realized then what was happening. The timeline wasn't being rewritten. It was synchronizing. Two versions of history, two branches of causality, collapsing into each other. Exodus had left Earth in one timeline, traveled for 40,000 years, and returned to a different one, a branch where they'd only been gone for 2 centuries. But their arrival was forcing a reconciliation. Reality couldn't sustain the paradox. So it was choosing. And it was choosing their version because theirs had more mass, more time, more evolutionary momentum. They had lived 40,000 years. We had only waited 200. Their history was heavier than ours. I tried to resist. To hold on to my memories, my version of events. But it was like trying to hold water in my hands. Every day, more of the world aligned with their narrative. Archives changed. Monuments appeared that had always been there, commemorating the Exodus departure 40 millennia ago. People began speaking of the old Earth, the one before the sending, and the new Earth, the one we'd built in Exodus's absence, as if this had always been our history. I met with the Exodus leader again, the tall one with the harmonic voice. I asked them if they knew what they were doing. If they understood they were erasing our timeline. It tilted its head, and for the first time, I saw something like sympathy in those dark eyes. "We are not erasing anything," it said. "We are coming home. If your timeline cannot accommodate our return, perhaps it was never the true one. Perhaps you are the ones who were lost. I'm writing this now because I don't know how much longer I'll remember. My own memories are becoming suspect. I look at photographs of my childhood and see buildings in the background that shouldn't exist, fashions that don't match the era I lived through. My colleagues at the Institute are now specialists in post-Exodus Earth, experts in the 40,000-year interim, and they look at me with concern when I insist it's only been 2 centuries. They think I'm suffering from temporal dissociation, a psychological condition that affects some people when confronted with deep time history. They're kind about it. They're treating me. And part of me, a growing part, wonders if they're right. If maybe I'm the one who's confused. If maybe Exodus was always meant to take 40,000 years, and I'm just having trouble accepting the scale of it. The weight of all that time. I can feel my certainty eroding. Every morning, I wake up and have to consciously remind myself of the timeline I used to know, and every morning, it gets harder to remember why it mattered. Why I was so sure. The Exodus descendants are everywhere now. They've integrated into our society, taken positions in government, in research, in cultural institutions. They're shaping Earth's future because, in a very real sense, they are Earth's future. They evolved from us. They carry our genetic legacy. And they're bringing something back with them, something they learned in 40,000 years of deep space isolation. A way of seeing reality as fluid. Negotiable. Malleable. Last week, I attended a ceremony at the memorial site. The place where Exodus had launched from. Except it's different now. It's ancient. Weathered by 40,000 years of remembrance. There are names carved into stone that goes down hundreds of meters, generations upon generations of Earth's population who waited, who hoped, who maintained the vigil for their lost children. I don't remember any of this being here. But everyone else does. And as I stood there, watching the Exodus descendants lay flowers on stones commemorating ancestors they'd never known but somehow still remembered, I felt it. The moment when my resistance finally broke. When the weight of their timeline crushed mine. I remembered. I remembered the sending. I remembered the grief of watching Exodus depart, knowing we'd never see them again in our lifetimes, in 100 lifetimes. I remembered the 40,000 years. Not as lived experience, but as inherited memory, passed down through genetic encoding or quantum entanglement or some mechanism I don't have words for. I remembered, and it felt true. More true than anything I'd thought I known. The others from the original contact team, the ones who'd been so certain of the 200-year timeline, they've all adjusted now. They're happy. Relieved. We did it, they say. We lasted long enough to welcome them home. Humanity endured. And I smile and agree, because what else is there to do? But sometimes, late at night, I'll wake up with a start, gripped by the certainty that something was stolen from me. That I lived a different history. That there was another Earth, another timeline, where Exodus had only been gone for 2 centuries and we were still the humans we'd always been. Where reality didn't bend to accommodate the weight of 40,000 years arriving all at once. And then the certainty fades. And I wonder if those are even my thoughts, or if they're just echoes. Residual resistance from a timeline that's already been overridden. The Exodus descendants tell us we're free now. Free from the burden of a short history, a narrow perspective. They've given us deep time, they say. They've reconnected us to our true legacy. And maybe they're right. Maybe this is better. Maybe 40,000 years of evolution has made them wise enough to guide us into whatever comes next. But I keep thinking about what their leader said. About how if our timeline couldn't accommodate their return, maybe it was never the true one. And I wonder what happens to the timelines that aren't true. Where they go. If the people who lived them just forget, just integrate into the new history, or if somewhere, in some unreachable branch of causality, there's still an Earth where Exodus has only been gone for 200 years. Where a contact team is still trying to understand how this is possible. Where someone is still resisting. Still remembering. I hope they hold on longer than I did.